Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by the Sikh Research Institute. Today's class is a part of the live series Love and Justice through Guru Nanak Sahib. This class, like always, will begin with a 40-minute lecture followed by 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So please drop your questions in the chat box and be sure to include your name and city. Now, I would like to introduce you to our instructor. Asha Marie Kaur is a research assistant with SICRI. She has a BA in Political Science and International Studies from Northwestern University. Her work at SICRI is tied to her love of the Persian language and the ways it connects Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. Please welcome Asha.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and welcome to the 8th session of Love and Justice through Guru Nanak Sahib. This means we're 2/3 of the way through the course, and I'm actually getting kind of sad about being more than halfway done. So I hope others are, also feeling more sad than happy about that. All right, my bio is becoming relevant again because we are going to talk about historical connections between Central Asia, Iran, Afghanistan, and the Indian subcontinent in today's session about Babar Vani, which is the Shabad that was directly revealed in confrontation of Emperor Babar and his invasion of the subcontinent. So we are going to start with that historical context, get a lay of the land, figure out some geography, because I think that's important to actually visualizing what we're dealing with and experiencing it with Guru Nanak Sahib through this Shabad. So who is Emperor Babar? What is this Khorasan that's referenced in the Shabad? So Khorasan is today the name of a provincial region of Iran, but it's a historical term for a landmass that crossed from Iran to Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. Much of the cultures involved here are Persian-speaking or Turkic language-speaking, or Afghan, Pathan, Pashtun-speaking. So there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of competing rulers and dynasties in this area, and it was, very highly valued land. So Babar wrecked Khorasan and then started moving closer to the Indian subcontinent. The location in which Guru Nanak Sahib witnessed the vicious attack by Babar's army is Saidpur, which is today Aminabad, Pakistan. So this is from Google Maps. Just dropped a pin here so you can see where it is relative to modern day borders. This gives us a little bit of an idea. Babar comes through Khorasan, takes over Kabul, and then sets his sights on the Indian subcontinent. Who does Babar overthrow in this battle? What are the sides of this battle? Who are the actors? Who are the players? So Babar is seizing power from the Lodi dynasty, which is ethnically an Afghan dynasty, a Pashtun dynasty, whereas Babar is of Turkic origin from Central Asia. So this is roughly the area that the Lodi dynasty had control over. It's also a Muslim empire, and the last ruler was Sultan Ibrahim Lodi, and this is a drawing of him. So these are the powerful players in this atrocity. So who is this Emperor Babar? Why is he so important, both in the context of Babar Vani and also in South Asian history in general? Emperor Babar was born Zaharuddin Muhammad in Andijan, which is in modern-day Uzbekistan. He's the great-grandson of the Timur the Great. He's of Turkic origin, conquered Kabul in 1506, which was a very big accomplishment. However, he was not always a successful military leader or a successful ruler. He had a lot of defeats, and he was very much struggling in this time period. So he actually set his sights on the Indian subcontinent after losing Samarkand, which is in modern-day Uzbekistan as well, for the third time. Samarkand is really a gorgeous place. I hope to one day visit it. I hope some of you one day have a chance to visit it. It was a very prized and treasured city at the time. It was a center of knowledge production, a very important place. A lot of leaders were kind of brought up there, and very central to the geopolitics of the era. So yeah, he set his sights on the Indian subcontinent, heading towards Delhi, and successfully overthrew Ibrahim Lodi in the First Battle of Panipat in 1526. So this is the time we're situating ourselves in with Babar Vani, is in this overthrow in 1526. However, he only ruled from 1526 to 1530 and was followed by Emperor Humayun. So another transition that happens in Babur's time is the consolidation of the Persian language as the cosmopolitan language of leadership. Babur was equally fluent in Turkish and Persian, and wrote half of his life's works were scribed in Turkish, the other half in Persian. However, by the end of his life, and by the time the Mughal Empire, he is the first Mughal emperor, is formally consolidated, Persian becomes the lingua franca of the empire, becomes the language of leadership. It becomes the most central political language of South Asia. So some context here. It's a little helpful to understand why these two dynasties came from competing lineages. One's of Turkic origin, the other is of Afghan origin, and generally speaking, there were a lot of rivalries between such lineages. But both of them, these are both Muslim dynasties. These are Muslim empires. So it's not like it's not that these are totally oppositional actors. They're just after the same type of power, if that makes sense. So how do we get to Babar Vani? How do we look at Babar Vani? Let's talk about this. So Babar Vani is made up of 4 shabads, which are found in different locations in the Guru Granth Sahib. So they're not one continuous shabad. It is a group of them, and 3 of them are in Rag Asa, and the last one is in Rag Talang. In Babar Vani, as you notice in the handout, Guru Nanak Sahib repeatedly says, "O Lalo, O Lalo." Guru Nanak Sahib was in Sayyidpur, aka Aminabad, to visit his friend Lalo, who was a humble carpenter. Sikhs may know of Lalo in the Saki or narrative about by Lalo and Malik Lago. So Guru Nanak Sahib comes to the city and he just wants to have dinner with his humble carpenter friend, but the exploitative, very wealthy, rich leader of the town is trying to convince Guru Nanak Sahib to have dinner with him instead. And when Guru Nanak Sahib turns down this invitation, he's confronted by Malik Lago, and that's when there's a conversation that comes about how the food, the hospitality of one who lives simply and earns their living in an honest way is sweet like milk, and the decadent, marvelous, very appealing on the surface food of someone who earns their money through exploitation it runs with the blood of that exploitation. So this is Guru Nanak Sahib's friend Lalo. Lalo is one of the few people referenced by name in the Guru Granth Sahib. There's only a handful of people that are ever referred to by name. So as we've discussed, the Guru Granth Sahib does not aim to tell stories in a structured way or to provide historical accounts. This is very much an emotional experience, an immersive reaction. It's not meant to give all the nitty-gritty details about the battle, about Babar, about Ibrahim Lodi. However, there's so much richness in Babar Vani. There's so much to learn. So this Shabad is revealed very publicly, openly, in direct confrontation of Babar. The Shabad then makes its way to Babar, who then puts Guru Nanak Sahib by Mardana in prison for speaking out. And it is in prison that Guru Nanak Sahib gathers together the prisoners, many of whom are women whose husbands have been killed, and starts what we would call today a prison uprising, where the workers get together and they go against kind of the punitive norms of the prison guards. And Babar was so stunned and shocked by this that he met personally with Guru Nanak Sahib. So this is a direct confrontation of power. It's not pacifism. I think all of us are becoming more and more aware each day of how dangerous it is to really speak one's mind in a repressive and violent environment. And to do so it's not responded to like pacifism, and it is not pacifism. It is actually strikes the very core of oppressive leadership. So we will now get into these 4 Shabads. This week, I'm going to focus on the English transcreations because this is a course that is done in an English medium. And I know that last week we had a little bit more of a vocabulary and word-focused way of looking at the Shabad. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the ideas and principles invoked, a little bit more of a zoomed out focus. Of course, we have the original Gurmukhi available in the handouts. But yeah, I think it's more useful to discuss Babar Vani today in this manner. And so I'm going to focus on the English transcreations so we can have a rich discussion in this session. Okay, so the first Shabad is in Rag Asa. And as you see, we begin with the master protected Khorasan and frightened Hindustan through Babar. But the Creator did not take the blame and sent Mughals as the messengers of death. You are the Creator of all. If a powerful kills a powerful, then the heart is not pained. But when powerful lion attacks a herd of cattle, then the master must be asked. The dogs, corrupt rulers, have lost their jewel merits. No one will remember them after they are gone. You yourself separate and unite everyone. This is your greatness. If someone keeps a great name and indulges in all the pleasure that mind wants, in the eyes of the master, that individual is seen as a worm, as much as its indulgence. O Nanak, one achieves something only by killing ego, living in humility, and reflecting on the Nam. So we can see here that Guru Nanak Sahib is struggling a bit. He's struggling with the reality that pain, violence, suffering are manifestations of the One just as much as joy and love and kindness are, because there is nothing beyond Ik Onkar, there's nothing beyond the ultimate being. So we have to reconcile how this can be, how these effects can come about, and how they are a part of Vaheguru as well. So we see we're setting up some metaphors here that are going to come up throughout the Shabads. So Hindustan is being ravaged, is being violated. It's Hindustan's side and agency is not being taken here in this context. And the Mughals are the messengers of death. Later on, this gets described as a bloody wedding party. Babar is described as a groom, but one that wreaks havoc and violence upon the wedding party. And we also have a very simple yet powerful acknowledgement, which is that there is a difference in violence between the powerful and violence that is inflicted upon the innocent. You know, if the powerful kills the powerful, the heart is not pained. But if a powerful lion attacks a herd of cattle, then we have a lot of questions we need to be asking. How did we get here? How did the master, how did Ikonkar get here? But how did we get here? Because we are Ikonkar, you know? And so we have to figure out how we got to this point. So Guru Nanak Sahib is setting up this set of questions that he's asking to work through this very difficult emotional experience of witnessing so much carnage, so much pain. All right. Okay. So now we get into what is Guru Nanak Sahib witnessing that is provoking this sort of incredibly difficult emotional reaction. We start to see the effects on women who suffer the most in this violence, whose hair made their faces beautiful with vermilion in them. They now have their heads shorn with scissors and their throats choked with dust. They who always stayed in private chambers are now denied any place. O wise, all praises, nobody has known your extent. You see everything assuming different forms. When they were married, they added to the splendor of their bridegrooms. They came in palanquins with ivory bangles sporting their arms. Ceremonial water pitchers awaited them, along with glass engraved fans. They received money in hundreds of thousands while standing as well as sitting. They eat coconut and dates, enjoyed on the bridal bed. Now nooses around their necks, and their strings of pearls are broken. Okay, so there's a lot to kind of unravel and immerse ourselves in here. So Guru Nanak Sahib does a lot of acknowledgement of femininity throughout these shabads when talking about these women. You know, these talks about their process of adorning themselves, of making themselves beautiful, of tapping into their feminine side, and how that beautiful, touching femininity ended in such a horrific way. There's, you know, no gory details are spared here in this Shabad. Guru Nanak Sahib then reaffirms, we are still praising the one because nobody knows the extent of the one. We cannot see every side and every angle the way the one can. The one sees everything assuming different forms. We are in a very limited form, have a limited perspective. Now, we then move into a little bit of, there's still the same level of empathy. You know, these women were victims and met a horrible, horrible fate. But we're not talking about the sort of the decadence, the riches, the hoarding of wealth that this dynasty was built on, that this, you know, the Lodi dynasty, the Mughal Empire, one's not really better or worse than the other. I mean, both are after riches, both want to display riches, both want to show the world how powerful they are through the extravagance of all these decadent adornments. So, you know, he talks about, I mean, the sort of wealth that these women were living in, but it didn't save them. At the end of the day, they suffered greatly, despite being extremely powerful. These were women that were a part of a powerful group of people, but they still suffered. Women still suffer even when they're in the highest strata of society. Riches and use they formerly relished had turned into enemies. So you relish your wealth, but when you're in this global system that equates the seizing of wealth with violence, it becomes a big liability at the end of the day. Minions of the conqueror's behest drag them to dishonor. So Guru Nanak Sahib is directly calling out the rape of women by soldiers. This is huge. He's directly calling this out and directly responding to the absolute horrific nature of this tool of war that continues to this very day and has been going on since the beginning of time, the beginning of rivaling human societies. Women's bodies become a site for the competing violent ambitions of men. Individuals are handed honor or punishment as per the divine will and pleasure. So we can't separate the horrible from the great in divine will. If one is mindful of the future in action, why would they be punished? In love of levity and frivolity of kings have lost their sense. Now that Babar's sway has spread, even the princes go without bread. So we're going to talk about this later, but we have to see how Guru Nanak Sahib was talking about very specific sources of violence, but then also what is the larger context that we're looking at here? How does violence kind of organically erupt in systems that are built on flawed principles, illusory ideals, on things like the accumulation of wealth, for example? So, you hoard, you build up your power through exploitation, and then you can end up falling. You become the victim of the very type of violence that you inflicted upon others to get where you were. Some Muslims are missing their time of namaz, others Hindus their puja. Hindu women now go about without their cleansed cooking squares and vermilion marks on foreheads. They never remembered Ram and now are not allowed to utter even Allah, now to please. Some have returned home and are inquiring about the well-being of their kin. Others, as ordained by the divine, sit and wail over their suffering. O Nanak, as Vaheguru desires things to happen, who is a human to question? So Guru Nanak Sahib here is acknowledging that both, despite the powerful men in question being Muslim women suffered alongside Hindu women, and he talks about the elements of their life that were most sacred to them were taken away from them. So this is a deep respect for their way of life and for what they have lost, even though that way of life is different than the Sikh path that Guru Nanak Sahib is setting out to forge. They never remembered Ram and now are not allowed to utter even Allah, now to please. So they were never living truly in the divine, living in this very flawed, decadent, elite society. But the Muslim women didn't win out either. We're not, and there's no way to just undo the damage that's being done. So if you're a Hindu woman who is suffering in this battle, becoming a Muslim surface level and saying Allah is not really going to take away from the violence you're experiencing. And this also, the worship of Allah that is encouraged in this society is fundamentally flawed. I mean, these dynasties, these empires are built off of a flawed premise of proposed religiosity. As we know, Guru Nanak Sahib offers throughout his shabads the way to relate to Allah. So, but this isn't it. So, and he talks about how when men get killed in war, women are left with nothing, and women end up carrying the emotional burden in the aftermath. So how do we reconcile this? I mean, how can we can be angry at the one, we can be angry at Ikonkar, be angry at Vaheguru, but who are we to question? Do we know how this all came about? Is anger the right response? We're now in the third Shabad, and we're continuing to talk about the fall of an extremely rich civilization. Where are those sports stable steeds and the flutes? Where are the sword belts, chariots, and those beautiful uniforms? Where are the studded mirrors and handsome faces not to be seen now? Just imagine this place that was so glorious and shining is now a ravaged ghost town. You are the master of this world. In one moment, you settle and unsettle. Wealth divides brothers. This is so important. Wealth divides brothers. Where are those houses, mansions, palaces, and elegant-looking sarais? Where are those couches and beautiful brides whose sight made one sleepless? Where is the chewing leaf, the leaf sellers, and those who patronize? All have vanished like a shadow. Many ruined themselves for wealth. It has disgraced so many. It does not come alone. It brings corruption and does not go along after death. Whomsoever the Creator confound, first has its virtues stripped. So we have a very scathing reflection on what a relentless focus on wealth does to the ultimate fate of a society. This is not a society built on the care and love and mutual aid of one another. This is a society built on the accumulation and the boasting and the bragging of wealth just for the sake of it. We now talk about ritual. There's a scathing response to ritual as well. Countless peers tried miracles to halt Babar as they heard of his approach. Ancient seats, houses strongly built, were burnt and princes were cast into dust, being severing. Yet no Mughal became blind, and no magic worked. Mughals and Pathans were locked in fight, and they wielded swords in the battle. This should say guns. I don't know why it says guns. My apologies. One fired guns, others attacked with elephants. They whose writ is torn in the court must perish, my brethren. Women of the Hindus, Turks, Batis, and Thakur, some had their veils torn head to toe, others were laid in cemeteries, whose husbands did not return home. How would they pass their night? The Creator itself is the doer and the instrument. To whom should I tell? Joy and sorrow are all in your will. Where shall I go and cry? O Nanak, the Master runs everything as per the will, and individuals receive it as it is written. So we see that there's a lot of people who try to capitalize in times of difficulty, selling cheap magical tricks and rituals that do not work. Tactics for violence can be different. Not every battle has a quote good guy and a quote bad guy. Some might fire guns, others may attack with elephants, but the violence is the same and it's just as reprehensible. And the actions do come back to hurt not only the people enacting it, but everyone, because we are all an equal part of this structure. We're all manifestations of the one. So people will face their fate at the end of the day. Again, we talk about the violation of women. These were women who wore veils over their face. This is something that was practiced in both Hindu and Muslim cultures, and still is across South Asia, Afghanistan, Iran. They were supposed to be. They were protected as this prized object, frankly, and they were violated at the end of the day. And many of them would lose their husbands and have to deal with those emotional ramifications for life. But this does come from the Creator. Joy and sorrow are all in your will. And Guru Nanak Sahib is struggling. I mean, how do we reconcile this yet again? I'm spreading the message as I receive it from the Master, O Lalo. Okay, so now we're moving into, I've asked these questions, I've had this emotional response. What do I do with this? What are the takeaways? What's the call to action? How do I process this with someone who's a loved one, a close friend? And I am spreading the message as I receive it from the Master. There is no man in the sky coming down to speak to Guru Nanak Sahib. This is a direct experience There is no book of laws that is going to be given to Guru Nanak Sahib to provide the jurisdictional guidance that will help deal with violence. There is an experience, there is a witnessing, there is a direct engagement. Guru Nanak Sahib is processing it. He's speaking to the one, directly, he's speaking to the one through his close friend. He's going through this emotional journey, and what comes out of this? This is similar to how the revelation of Ik Onkar, of the qualities of Mool Mantar, they were not handed down on a tablet. It was experienced directly. Just like we experience the pain in our bodies, we don't know what it comes from. It doesn't always make sense. When we're sick, when we're suffering, when we're ill, when we have a disease, we don't know what we did to deserve it. We don't know the source. There's so much to grapple with. And this violence that Guru Nanak Sahib was witnessing is like witnessing and experiencing having a disease in your body, but the body is the greater world and the greater society. Babar started a wedding party of sin from Kabul and asked for gifts by force, O Lalo. Shame and righteousness have gone into hiding, and lies have become the norm, O Lalo. Gone are the days of Qazis and Brahmins, the evil has become the priest, O Lalo. The Muslim women recite the Quran and call Khuda in pain, O Lalo. Similar is the fate of Hindu women of all the castes, O Lalo. O Nanak, they sing the wedding songs of blood, and blood has replaced saffron, O Lalo. So what do we see here? We see Babar represented as a groom. This is critical because Guru Nanak Sahib is talking about, has been discussing, acknowledging, highlighting patriarchal violence. And now Babar is being depicted as a violent, abusive groom whose military is raping and violating women, asking for gifts by force. Shame and righteousness have gone into hiding. Lies have become the norm. You know, we talk about war crimes, right? But what does it mean for there to be, you know, a war brought upon by powerful against the less powerful? That's not a crime, you know. What's the positive violence? There's no positive offensive violence. Gone are the days of Qazis and Brahmins. The evil has become the priest, O Lalo. You know, where are these so-called, you know, righteous religious leaders that can guide our morality? They're like nowhere to be seen. Muslim women have suffered, but they are still, there's such an acknowledgement of how in touch women are with the divine, that even in the most difficult moments of pain, it is women that are trying to affirm their connection to the divine rather than sever it and bring themselves into enacting more and more violence. It is Muslim women, it is Hindu women of all the castes. So there is an acknowledgement of the varying levels of oppression. O Nanak, they sing the wedding songs of blood, and blood has replaced saffron. I mean, if you think about it, many of the people involved in war making today, they think of themselves as quite important, as powerful in a justified way. You know, they think what they're hosting is, you know, it's a party, it's a wedding. There's something to celebrate about it. But the wedding songs are blood, and blood has replaced saffron. In this city of dead bodies, Nanak sings the praise of the Master and says this principle: who has created the world and made it indulge is overseeing it sitting alone and detached. Ik Onkar is the only self-evident being, the only one that is alone and detached. We all are in, you know, there's only one self-evident being. We're all interconnected manifestations. True is that Master and true is its verdict. True justice on principle it delivers. Body and clothes are being torn into pieces. Hindustan will remember my words. Comes in 1578, Babar, and leaves in 1597, the sun. Many followers of warriors will rise. Nanak speaks the words of truth when they are most needed. So Guru Nanak Sahib is speaking up, calling out truth to power when it is most needed, when it is not easy, when to do so is not the pacifist way to go. It will have severe consequences and one has to stand firm and brave in the face of those. So I want to close off by discussing a little bit more the centrality of women and the very direct engagement with the reality of gender-based violence that Guru Nanak Sahib is bringing about in these shabads. The reading for this session by Nikki Guninder Kaur Singh, Babar Vani, and the Call for Gender Justice is incredible. I really recommend people read it even more than once to really absorb all of it. And so she says, except my screen is covering my ability to read. One second. The link between Hindustan and women raises our consciousness for her body, for herself. The raped, abused, plundered Hindustan simultaneously speaks of the pain and subjugation inflicted on mothers, wives, sisters, and daughters. Babar Vani is saturated with Guru Nanak's plea that the women in motherland be healed. Respect and love for Hindustan means respect and love for women in everyday life. Guru Nanak does not evoke a goddess image, which can actually be harmful for women. So this is very important. Guru Nanak Sahib is talking about real women here. How they're suffering, how they are imperfect beings too, that are involved in a system primarily led by the men in their lives, but one that is harmful nonetheless. You know, they are sitting atop of wealth accumulated through exploitation as well. He directly calls out sexual crimes against them, directly shows the connections between the violence of war and the violence against women. You know, there's violence against women that happens on a individual to individual level that looks so similar to the violence of a whole military against a group of people. And Hindustan here is not meant to be, she goes into this in the reading, but Hindustan was simply a word for that place on that side of the Indus River. It comes from that etymology. So it's not to say these are Hindu women necessarily. There's Muslim women suffering as well. So there is this plea to look at who's suffering most in this conflict, and that's women. And that is where we're focusing our call to action, and where we're focusing the call for justice. So what is the call for action? What is the framework that comes out of Babar Vani? And it's one that comes out of reflecting and engaging with the Shabad. Again, there's no rule book of laws, jurisdictional guidelines, code of punishments, anything that comes out of this. We have to work together to construct this framework, and Guru Nanak Sahib is working through this in conversation with a close friend. So first, we look at who has the power. Who's the lion? Who's the herd of cattle? Who suffers even within this group of powerful people? In this case, there's a particular plight of women, even those who come from a powerful subsection of society. What are the direct sources of violent backlash? And what is the product of the general environment? So how do we have specific governments today that enact crimes against humanity? But what is that system that allows them to do it? And are we better? Are we absolved from it because we live in a country that's not technically, perhaps we live in a country that's not technically directly involved in these conflicts? No, we're not. We are just as much a part of the system, and we all have a call to action within this system. And every action we take to process our own participation in violence, our own way of reacting and dealing with power, is a reflection of the larger system as well. Something I like to just give a real world example to kind of ground us back in that. You know, oftentimes Europe these days, the European Union, acts as kind of a power broker and a mediator between countries that are at war with one another. But the European Union, through its companies, through its geopolitical involvement, through its investments, is just as involved in the systems that causes these countries to inflict violence on each other's civilians for the name of resource gain. I mean, every country is using the tangible resources that are gained from, taking land from people, from exiling people from their homes, whether that be oil or natural gas or factories. Right now, much of the everyday objects we own are made in factories that enslave people. So is violence coming from one source or from multiple? Is there really a good guy and a bad guy? There could be. It is valid to defend oneself. It is valid to exert one's sovereignty. So it is valid to participate in what is called a war to defend oneself. But it's also, there are wars that they're offensive on both sides. How do we tell the stories of the marginalized, of diverse victims, giving them agency and autonomy, acknowledging their position, respecting where they come from, respecting that they come from perhaps a Hindu background or a Muslim background in this case? And how do we liberate these groups of people versus saving them? I mean, the notion of saving women comes from the idea that women are weaker than men. The notion that women are weaker than men is what turns women into objects that get caught up and in violence and end up being victims of violence. So we have to remove this hierarchy in order to get ourselves out of this cycle of violence. How do we contend with violence and pain being just as much a part of the ultimate being? And what is our call to action? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to speak the truth, even when it's difficult, even when it's unpopular, even when it's difficult? How do we parse through information, the mirage and the illusions that the powerful are trying to put up to show, oh, no, we're doing the right thing, we're doing the good thing. No, this wasn't our fault. How do we seek truth? How do we chisel out the truth and stand with those who are suffering? And I want to close by saying that there will always be pain. And I've said this before in this course, there will always be pain and suffering. But there's a degree to which that we do have control over through how we orient ourselves. If each of us made a decision to orient ourselves toward justice each day and towards principles of living that uplift one another, these eruptions of competing powers that go at each other's throats and hurt many innocent people would be few and far between. There'd be far fewer of them. So again, it is not completely avoidable, but we can keep carving out those pathways to create a world like that. And it is so difficult to see. We might wonder, why do these innocent people suffer? And why do some horrible people get away with the crimes they commit for their whole lives? And that's because at the end of the day, we are just these fleeting manifestations of the one. So, I might be me today. I'm not a war criminal, but I'm just as much a manifestation of one as a war criminal. I could be gone today and tomorrow, a new war criminal comes up. So fundamentally, we are all this equal part, but that means we all have an equal choice. We have an ability to orient ourselves. Even the most evil person has the ability to orient themselves in a different direction, and orient themselves in qualities of Moolmantar, in Ikonkar creator-like qualities, in qualities that would bring us all to a much better path. So there is a sadness to this sort of indifference in a way about who we are. It is very sad to see that even the best person can suffer the most. But there is also this astonishing potential here. that even the worst person has all the qualities of the one wrapped up in them. So we just have to create the environments that bring out those qualities, that hone those qualities, that chisel out that path. So with that, I will wrap up this lecture and we can move on to questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Asha. I think today's lecture gave us a little more of this, chiseling process, the love and the justice that's so innate to Sikh that you've been trying to bring to the forefront through this course. Particularly this last section on the framework of justice, I think was quite helpful. We do have a couple questions, but I encourage everyone who's attending to drop their questions, as we do have a little bit of time to answer them. So our first question is from Judith. They ask, when you say language of leadership, how is that different than the language of the educated class?
Yeah, so that is a great question. Honestly, it's not that different. So it means that the courts are writing all their documents in Persian, for example, and then anyone who is involved in cultural production, literary production, poetry, legal issues, then also learns Persian in order to be able to participate in that way. So so then essentially it becomes the language of the educated class. I was talking to someone about how there's no distinguishing between the words to read and to study in most South Asian languages, because only scholars learn to read and write for the most part, which is why the creation of Gurmukhi and it was kind of a gift to the people, because it was a way for the common people to have a standardized script, which wasn't happening before. You know, you only learned a script in order to have one of these very well regarded, sought after positions. Yes, Persian was language of leadership and therefore of those who were educated.
Great, thank you. Thank you for illuminating that fact. I never realized the word for to read and to study was the same. Just a great fun fact. And the next question is from Surinder from Hawaii. They ask, in regards to Lalo, are they a follower, a friend, or fit into some other category?
Good question. Both. Lalo is both a friend of Guru Nanak Sahib, who he would take the time and make the effort to visit, but also was a follower of Guru Nanak Sahib's way of life. So I like that there is not a sort of hierarchical difference here. And, Bhai Lalo was Guru Nanak Sahib's Sangat, I think that's a beautiful way to think about it.
Lovely. Yes. And our next question asks, it's a little expansive, but much Bani is written in the feminine tense. Any comments on that?
Yes. This is an excellent question. This is an extensive question. It's a huge one. A lot of Bani is written in the feminine tense. The gurus adopted the feminine tense to show the feminine kind of path towards accessing the divine. And this oftentimes creates a metaphor where the one, Ek Onkar, the master, is the husband, and the gurus are embodying a bride or a woman who's deeply in love. Nikki Guninder Kaur Singh writes in Babar Vani and the Call for Gender Justice how this has been heavily misinterpreted and skewed to create this notion that husbands, lowercase h, plural, are to be worshipped as the ultimate one. That's not what's being said here. Fundamentally, there is only one husband to submit to. There is only one true hierarchy. There's only one true power differential, and that's between us, the small manifestations, the fleeting manifestations of the creator, us, the creation, and the creator. So this is a very, and you see we have the wedding metaphor that's happening as well, describing how Babar is being described as a groom here, but not one to be submitted to, not one to be praised, not one to be loved. Nikki Gunandarkar writes extensively on the use of the feminine tense in Bani, but there is this encouragement to tap into the feminine side in order to get to know the vastness of divine qualities, in order to really understand, to really immerse oneself in the sort of love for creator and creation that a Sikh is supposed to have. And also, this playing with gender in grammar, this gender in the various metaphors for ikonkar, really affirms this true gender egalitarianism. That gender is a construct. It's a way of being. It's something that we tap into emotionally. It's not merely a physical appearance, and that is shown, very directly by the gurus adopting a different gender in their shabad. So they're showing us how there's this emotional and mental exploration of gender and what it means, and we can gain insights from this, and that it's not this simple physical construct that many people make it out to be. This is a very condensed answer of something that really a whole academic course can be taught on, but I do think it's a beautiful thing. It's something to look very carefully at, and look at how the feminine tense in Bani then, it kind of indicates and shows a particular type of relationship with the one, and looking at the various metaphors of ikonkar, sometimes represented as a mother, sometimes as a father, sometimes as the husband. So yeah, that's my short, condensed answer on the various ways gender is explored in the Guru Granth Sahib.
Thank you, Asha. That was amazing. Our next question comes from Gurpreet Singh in Hamilton, Ontario. They ask, is there any evidence of the order of arrival of the 5 Kakkars, the Ks, in Sikhi, given that Guru Nanak Dev Ji noted violence and tyranny against women? Was perhaps the adoption of the Kajera and its meaning of restraint, not simply chastity, which I understand is a distortion of its original purpose, of a reminder not to rape and pillage after a battle's victory, brought forth earlier in Sikhi, say, than arming oneself with a kirpan or wearing a gada?
So I'm going to be honest, I don't know if there is an order or what that exact order may be. I really like what you've brought out here about the meaning of restraint versus modesty or chastity. Yeah, I do. So I think order, again, I don't know if there was an order, but I think looking at anything in a particular order tends to be, not the focus in the Sikh paradigm. But I do think that you make a very compelling argument. But yeah, the Kakkars came about after Guru Nanak Sahib's time, for sure, and after much reflection on the Sikh worldview that had been built up over time. So, but I do not know the answer to that. It is something that I will absolutely look into myself, because I find it very interesting. We do know that to defend oneself is supposed to be the kind of final option. That is something we know from Guru Gobind Singh, from the Zafarnama, that as long as all other modes have been exhausted, halal as burdan beshamshir, that's when it's halal to raise the sword. So yes, there is a little bit of an ordering there as far as, what mindset we start with and what the tactic ends up being at the end of the day.
Awesome. And the last question, I think, just builds off of that. Surinder B asks, which guru established the 5 Ks? So
this is brought about in Guru Gobind Singh's time.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so it seems like that is the end of the questions that we have. I invite everyone, to ask as many as they please in the following lectures as well. Thank you, Asha, for another lovely class, and everyone for participating and joining us week and week again. Please note, as always, that a recording of this live class will be available within 24 hours. We are also hosting bi-weekly live webinars. Our next webinar will be this Sunday on July 19th at 11 a.m. EST, Bhakti and Shakti, where we explore questions such as what are the modern applications of these fluid concepts? How do we maintain a true connection to all the strength, internal and external, that Sikhi affords us? Join us in conversation with historians and academics Dr. Jaspreet Bal, Baneet Singh, and Harleen Kaur as we look at the theory and application of the concept in our modern journeys. And lastly, don't forget to tune into the Sikhcast, a podcast produced by Sikhri, where we explore the various issues and events affecting Sikhs worldwide. Thank you for joining in. Today's live class will be ending now. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.